They want the personal connection. They don't want tricks, you know. They don't want bells and whistles. And I find that, a lot of the push towards incorporating bells and whistles with Pear Deck and all these things, you know, really are getting in the way of a personal connection of just sitting and talking to the students and having time to reach them.
Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring the topics of music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. I feel like when we did this last, we just talked about my book, and that was fine and awesome and a great conversation, but I was like, there's like so many other things that we're way overdue to talk about. So we should do that. How's your break going?
It's good.
Yeah.
I really chosen to give myself a break. And that's important, not to spend too much time dwelling on what I'm going to do when school returns. And it's been kind of important. Normally when we're on winter break or spring break, I'm always thinking of what I'm going to do when we return to school. But I really felt this time that a break without thinking about those things is very important. Because right now school is so invasive into our own homes. And this thin line between your home and your school has disappeared. So as school finished, I took down my keyboard and I put it away. I actually, put my microphone over to the side. I just, brought it back for this morning. And I've pretty much tried to get out of, every time somebody says, oh, we should have a Zoom together. I'm like, I need to take a break. Because I was getting, I was to the point where I was fed up of being on camera every single day. Because it's not only Monday through Friday for me. As a church musician, it's Sunday and also a rehearsal for that on Saturday. So there wasn't a day when I wasn't thinking about, what am I wearing? What does my hair look like? What does my beard look like? What is behind me in my studio? Because it's so invasive into your own home all the time. And I think teachers need to take that break for themselves. There's a wonderful Yiddish word which is uitgezoomt, which is zoomed out. We are overly tired from being on Zoom because there are all sorts of extra pressures around that, and we don't get a choice with that. Our students get a choice of, if they don't feel, they get out of bed late one day and they haven't done their hair, they're having a bad hair day, they just switch their cameras off. Mm-hmm. In fact, we have students that do that every single day, and, they are teenagers and they have the image dysphoria or whatever it is. I'm not sure that's the correct term, but they're particularly with, high schoolers that are concerned with how they look on a camera and how 20 other people in the class see them on camera, which of course is all imaginary, it's all in their heads. But they get this free pass every day. We teachers don't. You've got to be on camera. And that being on camera means all the mess that's in your background is there as well. And in fact, when you're on camera, you're looking straight at it. So as I look at myself, I can also see that I've left an envelope on top of my real book behind me, and it's bugging me. So I have to grab it and tidy it and put it away. That sort of thing, So I really thought that just for my own personal sanity, it was important to take that, long Zoom break until, New Year's Eve or so. And then I can set back up again, ready for school to start on Monday.
I feel equally like I have needed a break from school, and I've totally disengaged. It's impossible to not think about work, but it's not impossible to say I won't answer email. And I have noticed like an email coming from a student or two, and I'm like, nope, not happening. And I haven't made any content for my classes. I haven't done any planning. Do you I guess there's two layers to this that I want to tackle. There's sort of like this presentation, sort of like, what does it mean to be like on the job or off the job, and how does your preparation and presentation influence that in and outside of a classroom? But then there's also like a prep, like a, you know, like a work and a prep kind of piece to this. And I think that lots of teachers have really taken, I'm seeing a lot of different approaches to how this happens. Like, I have really tried to minimize the amount of especially technical lifting that I'm doing in preparation for a class. Like, if it's something that I don't think is going to make my students' class and learning more engaging, I'm not going to do extra clicks and taps in Canvas or in Noteflight or something. And I get the impression, and I know part of this is because I'm a little bit tech savvy, but I get the impression that I am more willing to like let go of a technology, or even just something that I perceive as work or preparation, if it's not gonna, you know, like my students really just want to play every day, and I find that I can get them doing that with less work on me.
They want the personal connection,
right?
They don't want tricks, you know. They don't want bells and whistles. And I find that, you know, a lot of the push towards incorporating bells and whistles with Pear Deck and all these things, you know, really are you know, getting in the way of a personal connection of just sitting and talking to the students and having time to reach them. So I'm in total agreement. I'm not the sort of person that's going to try to create some, you know, great interactive slide presentation, you know, because it's just, it's not worth it, because it's taking time away from personal connection time, I think, with students. And I know that there's this push towards engagement, and the thought is that if you make something interactive, that students will engage with it more. But I have found that in actual fact, just being a gentle, calming voice for students, and just always being reassuring, and always letting them know that you're completely on their side, you're in their court, that is engaging. Because students, they need, you have to have a relationship before you can create the, you know, the engagement with the material. You know, the most engaging material in the world can be a massive turnoff because of the way it's presented.
Right.
You know, you could have an incredible presentation. I mean, we've seen how PowerPoint just kills engagement. Whereas, of course, when PowerPoint came along, everybody thought, oh, this is the greatest thing. It's going to make people so engaged in the material because they can see it and they can hear it at the same time. And of course, it turns out that this was a huge, huge mistake, because our brain process written word at a completely different place in the brain and speed that we process spoken word. So it ends up as this massive dysphonia inside our heads when somebody puts up a slide and then proceeds to read it. This is disengaging. And so... And there can be other issues as well. Right now, what I want my students to focus on is my voice, what I'm saying to you.
Right.
You know, and I don't need to double down on that with some form of interactive slide or anything like that, which is actually going to create a dysphonia in their brains. You think the number of times in which you're watching an instructional video. Okay, and Robby, you're a highly intelligent man, but I will bet there's times when you're watching something, you're like, wait, stop, pause, rewind, let me get that again.
Yep.
And for somebody that, you know, is highly intelligent, that's necessary. So think about the children, and think about if we're trying to talk at the same time as making our world look like we have created a wonderful YouTube studio and stuff like that. Kids can't keep up. And that is disengaging, because nothing is more disengaging than being confused. If you are confused a few minutes into the lesson, you're like, oh, I can't take it. I give up. And it doesn't matter how much engaging stuff you put later in the lesson and how many interactive slides and things. If you've already lost people, then You know?
I think, right, you're exactly on it here. I think, like, if you look at these highly produced lesson plans and resources in a vacuum, I mean, as if you could, you can't, but if you looked at them, like, on, I don't know if you can speak to this objectively, but it's like, if you look at a nice PowerPoint, of course, it in of itself is more engaging if it has interactive elements and more pictures. But I think the bottom line is, like, preparing these kinds of materials for a live class it kind of boxes you into a corner, and then it makes it more difficult, or at least more frustrating, for a teacher to adapt to their students if they aren't getting it. And this starts what you can, I mean, PowerPoint is honestly like the easiest thing to adapt and change, but like, I'm thinking also to some of the expectations I've seen in school districts for, like, managing course content in a learning management system. It's like, well, if you want me to, like, have a lesson plan for every day of the week, like, my lesson plan changes on a minute by minute basis. Like, I hear a trumpet player play and I'm like, well, that just changed my perception of exactly how I was going to approach the rest of the lesson. So, you know, how much clicking and tapping can you really be expected to do? You know, it takes away the flexibility. You have to be able to be there with your students. Your voice has to be, your personality has to be guiding them and adapting constantly to their needs.
Well, teaching is an art, as you know. But a lot of people that are not teachers don't see the subtlety of that. And they see teaching as just a delivery of instruction model. So create the instruction and deliver it. But if that was all we did, you and I wouldn't do this gig.
Right. Anyone could do it if that was what it was. It would just be, you know, like an assembly line.
Exactly. And we wouldn't do it. We do what we do because we love to see what it is that we do and how it motivates and changes those students.
I still get excited.
Those things are instant decisions,
right,
that happen in a classroom according to, you know, maybe the way you just see a child's face change when you say something. And, you know, those magical moments are what the great teachers are about. It's how to read your students all the time, and you alter your instruction along the way. I've always objected to, and that's funny that I use the word objected. I always have objected to this idea of having objectives on the board.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
And I have always told my administration, if you come into my classroom, you're not going to see the objective on the board. Because the objective on the board takes away that great aha moment, which you can have in a classroom according to the direction you go. We're supposed to be about student-centered instruction, yet it's the teacher that writes the objective on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how about we do something where pick a student and say, hey, what do you want to learn today? Stick it on the board. And then we'll do that. Oh my gosh, you'd ruffle some feathers if you tried that.
Yeah.
It also takes away those tangential moments. You know, as you say, you could have in your head, okay, I'm going to work on this particular piece today. And you hear your trumpet player do something in a certain way, and suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, that is a wonderful thing that I want to teach the other children. Maybe about the way that trumpet player articulated something or phrased that. And you can take yourself down a wonderful path on a tangent to what you initially intended. You know, and what happens if you get to the end of the lesson and you didn't cover what the objective on the board was? You know, do you get written down by your admin for that, or do they even notice? I just don't know. I think it's much better to establish a pattern of what we're going to do today, so that students know when they come into your classroom every day, they know what we're going to do. You know, and in the case of, you know, your band classroom, Robby, you know, they know we're going to come in, we're going to get our instruments out, we're going to warm up, you know, we're going to blow through our instruments, okay? And then maybe we're going to, you know, spend some time just doing some scales and some, you know, tuning exercises. And then maybe we're going to spend 5 minutes chatting about the things that are coming down the pike, the concerts we have and the field trips. And then we're going to maybe blow through 2 pieces. And then at the end of class, we're going to have a run through of one thing that we absolutely love. And then we will put our instruments away, and then the bell will go and we'll go to our next class. That structure tells the kids what they're going to do today. You know, they don't need the subtlety of an objective, you know, copied out from the Maryland state curriculum written on the board. Because to me, it's a turnoff. It really is.
Yeah.
You know, I even get turned off in professional development where I go and I sit there and, you know, the first thing is a slide comes up and says, here's what we're going to achieve today, or here are our objectives for today. I'm like, oh, take me home now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I really do. I hate it so much. But I was trained in a system where we don't do that. In the UK, we do not write objectives on the board.
Right.
You know, we don't write a plan for the day. Mention that to an administrator here, they will think you're, you know, off your head.
I mean,
how could you possibly exist without writing your objective on the board?
Exactly. Well, you're voicing the difference between a learning objective and a routine. And I think routine is super healthy for people who are making art, for people who are being creative. You know, I think we need routine. But yeah, the learning objective. And the thing is like in the performing arts, you know, so many of our objectives, like we don't move from one thing in a curriculum to the next. Like we establish criteria and a way of hearing and speaking about that criteria, and then we just in a circle dive deeper and deeper and deeper, like tone quality, for example. Like tone quality, and I love this about teaching in the performing arts. It's one of the things I do love and admire about teaching woodwind instruments and percussion is like you can really teach a kid about mastery when you have one kind of concept that you're just exploring, but you're just going down the rabbit hole. And as your ears develop, your concept of what a trumpet sounds like can deepen. And then your procedure for how you practice and how you meet that goal can deepen. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really cool thing. And then if you can meet kids with that process and get them excited about that process of getting better rather than like product focus and concert focus, then you can all of a sudden really open up your kids to being inspired and having a voice musically, which I have, you know, I've never felt that the expectation of having an objective on the board. This was the thing when I was teaching in a different district. It was really expected that you had that on display. And I mean, you know, we're all, any teacher who's ever had that battle knows how to be a wordsmith. And there is a way to please someone from the outside with words, but also stay true to the goals that I think make you a good teacher. But it requires a little bit of finessing. You have to find out, like, what is someone actually looking for when they want to see an objective? You know, like, what do we master? Well, if we're in a performing arts environment, well, we're mastering a process, not a product. And what does that look like? Well, it looks kind of the same every day. So, you know, I don't know. It's an interesting dichotomy for sure, but I'm with you totally. It drains me when I see that.
I would also say that it's about control.
Right.
And I would say that it's about an administration controlling you and about you controlling students. And I think that's the way it always looks. I think it looks that way to the students, and it feels that way to me whenever I'm told, you know, administration will be coming around the building and they will be looking for your objective on the board. It's a matter of control. You know, we had that edict sent down to us a few years ago, and there was this email which said, you know, in the next week our administration will be doing drop-ins to classrooms and they will be checking that you have an objective written on the board. Now, I happen to be teaching guitar in the band room, and it was a situation where with guitarists it's chaos from the bell goes to the bell. You know, from bell to bell. And that's the joy of teaching guitar. You don't have a moment to go into the room beforehand and set up. You're going into a situation where you've got chairs and stands all set up for a band and kids coming in with guitars and they're likely to bang them on the stands and all sorts of things. And you're trying to protect the integrity of your friend and colleague's band room as well as make you know, a situation where you're not in an ideal situation, you know, work, because of course there's got some kids that will come and sit in the front row and there's not enough chairs in the front row to do that, and then you've got some kids that will insist in sitting right back where the percussion usually sits. And all of that stuff was going on, right? So one day I'm in the band room, the kids are in there playing, and the administrator walks into the room, walks straight up to the board and writes down the objective that my colleague had just written there about breathing exercises, checked it off, and walked out of the room again. And the kids just looked, and they said that they automatically saw that it was ridiculous that she thought we were doing breathing exercises, with guitars. And
so they thought that it was your objective and that you had successfully written.
Yes. And we were sitting there playing Hotel California or something. And they thought that my objective for the class was to get the kids breathing together. I don't know.
But that shows, that shows a disengagement. It sort of like proves your point. I mean, that there's meaninglessness in the process if all it is just a checkoff for leadership.
Well, that's the thing. The kids also see it as meaningless.
Right.
That means every single class, when they go into and they see it on the board, they immediately disengage from that objective because they know it's about controlling them.
Yeah, one of my favorite little tidbits, and it's anecdotal, but it fits, I guess, here, is I was directing the elementary school honor band in our district. This is like a notorious, by the way, I'm going to introduce you in the front, but welcome to the show, back to the show, Richard McCready. I just figure I should say you by name at some point while we're recording here. And I should also acknowledge that for those who have not listened to your past appearance on the show, I will link that episode in the show notes. And I will also just establish for the record, for those who don't know or haven't figured it out, we teach in the same district, Howard County Public Schools in Maryland. So when I say that I directed the elementary school honor band, I'm referring to the one in Howard County where we both work. And, one of the things we do in the elementary school honor band is we have sectional coaches who, for the first few rehearsals, will come and, these kids in the elementary school honor band it's by director recommendation that they are in the band. And a lot of them are coming from different musical backgrounds, different levels of experience. And one of the things that helps us to get everyone on the same page is to have sectional breakout groups where an instrument specialist will rehearse, I think our goal is to make something bigger than the notes on the page. But, one of the things that they do is they hammer out the notes on the page, make sure they're, that the notes are learned. And I, in those first rehearsals, since I'm not conducting anything, we'll just kind of make the rounds and check out the different sectionals that are going on. And one of our saxophone sectional coach is Maggie Shorb. She is one of our awesome, I love Maggie. One of our awesome educators. And she's amazing. And I walk into the room where she is teaching the saxophone sectional. And what I see is like 10 saxophone students all sitting in chairs, but facing different directions in the room. And the music is not on stands. It's like on desks. And she is just giving the most passionate speech to them I've ever seen given to fifth graders about putting emotion into the music. And they are so engaged with her, but the environment is like complete chaos. Like there are teachers who would crumble in that kind of environment, but she's just like got them in the palm of her hand, but has just sort of embraced the chaos that is also, stereotypical of fifth graders on saxophone. But they're engaged with what she's telling them, and she's taking it beyond the notes in the rhythms that are on the page, which is kind of the bar that we said is like, just get the notes and the rhythms learned if possible. And she's like taking it so far beyond that. But I think to that as like, there's no objective on the board. This is a teacher not in their own school building, not in any of our classrooms, not with students they've ever met before. They have a tool in their hand that they can use to make music. And that's pretty much what you're running with. And I just had to bring that story up because she's awesome and it was cool. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, the argument always comes that there's some students, especially special needs students, who need to know what to expect. And that's where your routine comes in. Those special needs students particularly thrive on routine anyway. We know that with many of our autistic kids, we keep the same routine and that keeps them grounded and happy. And those are the sort of kids that once they walk into a room, guess what? They're going to walk up to me and say, what are we going to do today? And I'll say, how about we make beats today? And they're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it could be the same thing every day. They'll walk in, hey, Mr. McCready, what are we going to do today? How about we make beats today? What do you think of that, John? Oh, okay, that's cool. Or if they come in and you say, what are we going to do today? How about we go out the back and shoot off firecrackers? And they'll stop for a moment and say, nah, what are we really going to do today?
Right.
And those students that require that routine, guess where they're going to ask for that routine? They're going to ask the teacher. They're not going to walk in and walk past the teacher and see what the objective on the board is. So, anyway, I could rail for days against.
I'm sure. Well,
practice.
Let me, if I could, let me kind of come back to something that you were talking about earlier about creating some separation and how the school has sort of invaded your home. And I think we're all feeling this way a little bit. I kind of wanted to flip that on you for a second and just confess. I don't know if this really needs to be called a confession, but I just want to state, like, I feel everything you're saying and I totally agree, but there is also a growing list, and I say a growing list because I've actually been thinking about this so heavily that I have started journaling about specifically this topic, is things that I actually do completely love about working from home.
Mm-hmm.
Things that have made my life better, things that maybe have made, I would say that more like learning and teaching is really challenging right now. I don't think there's any way that I can ever get to where I was in person in this online model. But there are things about working from home that have altered my life for the better, or at least adaptations I've made to my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And I'm asking myself, like, everything from I have more free time, I have more transition time between activities, I have more calm, I work in isolation, but I have community, but that community is not able to, my music team, for example, I love my music team, but we all work in the same office together. Like, when they need my attention, I don't have any control over my attention or focus, because if someone needs to bring something up, they bring it up right away. And there's a lot of things that do require that personal touch, but there's also a lot of things that, like, email is actually good for, like, someone can on their time prompt me, and then on my time, when I'm able to give that my attention, I can return the communication. Waking up slow, getting to work later, spending more time with my family. Like, the list of things that are working for me. You made me think of this because you said communicating with kids personally and being a calm demeanor in a presence in their life. Like, I put on a little bit of a show when I'm rehearsing a 65-person band. I have to command them, and I'm speaking a little bit more relaxed. I'm being a little bit more, not that I'm being fake with them. I believe there's a performative element to good teaching, but I feel just a little bit more like a natural extension of my own personality when I'm teaching online and speaking normally into a microphone. Like, what are some of those things for you that have been positive? And, like, do you think about this? Do you think about how to bring a little piece of that to in-person learning? Like, where are you at with this?
Yeah, I completely agree. There are many things that I love about this teaching at home. Yes, the ability to wake up on your own time without having to dart out the door at 6:30 to get to school by 7. I think we give ourselves incredible stress with that, with this early start. And I think we do that to the students as well, to give them incredible stress because they have to be up, and goodness knows how many of them in the house need to be showered, and how many, people need to get breakfast and all of that, and everybody get to the bus stop to stand there and freeze at a certain time. I think it is a much gentler start to the day, and I really, really do like that. I actually do enjoy the fact that kids are exempt from these arbitrary controlling behaviors which we force on them in a school.
Like sitting at a desk quietly for...
Yes, exactly. The fact that if the kid needs to go to the bathroom, they can just go to the bathroom and come back. They don't have to, raise their hand to ask. They don't have to carry a hall pass with them, which says boldly on it, I am missing valuable instruction time because I need to tinkle. They are, that sort of awkwardness is taken away, right? If they need to doodle, or they need to do something at the same time, they can do that. Now, of course, we want to teach them, about, paying attention and all the things. But in actual fact, doodling or learning to do something with your hands can actually aid, of course, concentration. When I was at school, I was an inveterate Rubik's Cuber, and I always had my Rubik's Cube. And I can remember what classrooms I would be allowed to twiddle with my Rubik's Cube and where I would get told off. And it turns out that the classes that I, played with my cube in, those are the ones that I did better at, because I was more likely to want to be there and not resentful. I remember years ago a student coming to me and in tears because she got detention for doodling in class. And I called the teacher. And I said, look, I've got this girl here, and she's going to serve her detention with me, if that's okay, because I want to talk to her about what happened. So she served her detention with me, and of course we went and had lunch. It was lovely. And that girl has kept in contact with me all through her life. And it's funny that she'll sit in meetings at work, and then she will send me a photograph of her page completely full of doodles. And doodling has never slowed her down,
right,
in what she does and what she learns. It's who she is, but yet she got a detention for doing it in class. Why? Because maybe the teacher was insecure and thinking that she wasn't paying attention. And so there are behaviors which we normally control within our classroom, or sometimes we're told to control,
right,
which I find even more frightening. And we don't have those. We do have, of course, some students that, unfortunately, they just take total advantage of that sort of thing. And it gets in the way of their own learning. And I don't know if they will learn from that themselves in that. I have had more students this year who are in a situation of failing because they just turn their cameras off and they zone out.
Right.
And that's something I cannot help them with. But I try, and conversations with parents and stuff like that. We're all trying to help with that. And I think in a classroom we're often also caught in that situation of being behavior police at the same time as being teachers. And with this, I think that we are freed up a little from always having to control, or at least being able to control things my own way, And so I do like that freedom. And for those students that are really in the zone, that's working quite well. And I will say that is 95% of my students.
Yeah.
Who are able to succeed in that environment. And they don't, if they need to, bring a snack with them to class, great. I can't stand these rules of, no eating in the classroom. I understand guidelines about eating in the classroom. You don't want to eat over equipment and stuff like that. But these blanket rules where kids can get detention for things which are just, very natural. We are humans. We need to eat. We need to go to the bathroom. We need to sleep. And these are the things that I think kids often get in trouble for, is needing to go to the bathroom, needing to sleep,
right,
needing to eat. We have sometimes in school where, particularly on days where we have an altered morning schedule, which can include an extra class, which would be a homeroom or an assembly or something like that, we have sometimes kids going 5 hours without eating. And also rushing between classes without time to go to the bathroom, without ever having a moment to take a power nap in their chair. And yet we're going to get to the stage where they're 5 hours into that, where if they, if they bring out a snack, or if they fall asleep at their desk, or accidentally pee themselves, they're going to get into trouble. Right. It's such a shame that because the classroom is about control, that we do that. I remember once in an observation, I had a boy that I taught for 4 years, and that boy, had a bowel disorder, and I knew that at 10 o'clock every morning he needed to go to the bathroom. And he'd be back 10 minutes later. And that was that. All right? And all this kid had to do, you know, was like nod to me. Like, it could be as simple as like somebody in an auction, you know, giving a wink to say an extra $20 on that. And I would see that. I would nod my head very gently. And this kid would get up, go to the bathroom, be back 10 minutes later. None of the other kids would really ever notice. Okay? And I wasn't going to have him raise his hand every day because, you know, what happens if you raise your hand every day? Somebody's going to say, you know, there's something wrong with that kid. Mm-hmm. So, of course, you know, in his senior year, you know, I was in one class and I was teaching and I was being observed. And, of course, this kid nodded to me. I nodded back. Off he went. Came back 10 minutes later. And, of course, I got knocked down on my observation because I did not write in his agenda book that he was allowed to go to the bathroom. I tried to explain. I said, what I have done for 4 years with that kid is a greater piece of teaching because I have let him retain his dignity.
Right.
And he's never had to tell the rest of the class they had a bowel disorder. Okay? It's just that is who he is. So, you know, that's kind of silly. And, you know, he came into my class as a 9th grader. Initially, what he wanted to be was a professional soccer player, right? He found somebody that accepted him. He found somebody that inspired him. And he ended up going to Berkeley. And now he's working studio work out in L.A.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yet I didn't write him a hall pass.
Yeah. It's often the people who inspire us who get us on that path, you know. Well, I think, you know, I just think it's worth, in light of our last conversation being specifically about the book, I just thought it would be worth saying to you, I don't know if this is, whatever. You won't be embarrassed,
dude.
Yeah, well, you won't be embarrassed if I say this on the air. I just think of, you know, specifically with this show and some of the things that I've done with the technology piece of my career and putting them out publicly. I mean, you are certainly someone who has inspired me to put that out there.
Thank you.
I was thinking about this morning in preparation for getting on the call. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know if I would do this to the extent that I do it or at all had you not said, hey, you should like go present at a conference. Me saying like, really, you think so? Like, oh, okay, sure. And then sort of catching the bug for that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, right. you sometimes it just takes someone seeing your worth and telling you, I mean, really, it is that simple. It is that simple. Like having your worth be celebrated and then a person, a teacher, a human being, you know, with a connection, being that person who sets you on maybe a different path than you would have taken. That's remarkable. And so simple. Like you wouldn't think that going to the bathroom would have anything to do with it.
Sure.
But yeah, it comes down to respecting the student's self-worth. You know, I think that, you know, I mean, certainly in large groups and being a middle school band director, I am as keenly aware as anyone that, you know, kids do take advantage of situations in large groups and socially where we can't, you know, there have to be some kinds of guidelines. Otherwise, I would say to myself, like, why do we need to have a bathroom pass? Why do we need to have the agenda signed at all? You know, I mean,
I think you have to always explain these things to students. They are children. They are learning this world. And we all were children and we learned this world. And we wondered why things happened. And I think we need to teach them that what we're not doing is asserting control. You know, and if there are rules about, you know, certain things that you do within your classroom or whatever, I think you need to be clear about the reasons for that, okay? Why do I not want you eating pizza over the computer? Okay, well, let's think about the grease in the pizza and what that might do to a keyboard, and how much that might cost to replace, and how inconvenient that would be for the next person at that desk. Let's also talk about the vermin that sometimes we get in the school, and maybe why we don't want to, you know, eat cookies and crumbs and biscuits I had a student in music tech years ago who ate like Cookie Monster. I've never seen a child eat where 3/4 of it ended up on the desk and only about 1/4 of it ended up going down his esophagus, every day he would eat like Cookie Monster. It was the most unbelievable thing. And, not just, why can't I eat over my desk? Because I said so. I don't mean anything, right? But I think if we do have sensible rules like that in our classroom, I think it's really good to let the students know why those are there. Why do we have fire drills? Is it just because we're supposed to have 10 fire drills a year? Or is it really because we do want children to be safe if we have an event of fire?
Yeah, I tell my students, I'm like, this fire drill is for me. I don't understand how these work until I fail it the first time of the year.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Why won't the teacher let me go to the bathroom? Well, the teacher might not want you to go to the bathroom at this particular point because this is the crux of the lesson, and if you just wait 4 minutes, there would be a better opportunity, right? And so maybe explaining those things would be so much better in a classroom rather than rules. Yeah. And so what I like about the pandemic thing and being able to teach from home is I can guide students in understanding that. And they actually begin to know, because of the routine of the lesson, that if there is a moment at which they need to go to the bathroom, they can choose that. Mm-hmm. And the kids that are developing their skills will understand that. At the end of the lesson, for example, they know that that is the moment never to miss, because that's when they're going to get the word of the day, which they need to unlock the assignment for the next day. So you never want to miss the last minute of class. Okay, so they understand that. So they understand that if the class is going to finish in 2 minutes, now is not the time to go to the bathroom. Wait until the class is over, then you can go, okay? They also know that in my class, we will spend 20 minutes of me going over what it is that I want them to work on, and then they get 20 minutes to work on it. While I just sit there and I'm like on call as the help if they need to ask me a question or ask something in the chat. But they've got 20 minutes to work on something. So they then know that maybe when we get to that point, that's the moment to get up, maybe stretch a little bit if they need to, maybe solve a Rubik's Cube if they need to, maybe go to the bathroom if they need to, and then, settle into what they need to do. Children are perfectly capable of working that out. In the actual classroom, when we're together, it is often the same thing. They know that at the beginning of the class, I'm going to be talking for 15, 20 minutes, and then they will have time to work on stuff. And so it is, really rare for kids to get up and walk out to go to the bathroom in that first 20 minutes, because they know there's going to be a moment later on where they can go. And I've also established that they don't, ask. They just, you don't have to raise your hand, have me calling you. Yes, John, how can I help you? May I please go to the bathroom? Oh, boom, embarrassing moment, right?
Right.
They just kind of walk to the door, they get my attention, nod to me, and I'm like, yep, all right, and they come back in a few minutes, all good.
Right.
No. I think we can, those are routines that we can establish in a pandemic as well. That they get used to how things work in a routine, and that we can trust them to do what it is that they need to do to stay alive, to go to the bathroom,
sure,
to those things that are just human needs.
I equate this to when we first started seeing the financial advisors that we see. I remember telling them how irresponsible I am with my money, and just telling them I spend so much of my money, we're going to be miserable to work with. We have no self-control over what we buy. And they're like, oh, no, pause. We don't care about any of that. We're going to tell you what you need to do to prepare for your future. And then we're going to take all the money that we need to help you do that. And then whatever is left, we don't care what you do with it. You can buy iPhones and Apple Watches every year, and if you can do that and still eat, that's fine. We're going to help make sure that when you retire, you can still continue to eat and really seriously, we do not care about your budget at all. And I was like, oh, that's actually weirdly reassuring, because then I know that any rules I have to create, I'll create for myself in order to meet that goal, rather than getting, arbitrary rules thrown at me.
Right. So it's, I don't care if you go to the bathroom or eat a snack during my class, but I want you to make good choices about that.
Right.
And you will learn how to do that. And that's way, way better than the kind of thing which tends to try to teach kids by control.
Right. Right. So taking lessons, and maybe not even lessons from the pandemic, because that's almost maybe too broad, but like just things that you like.
There are lots of lessons from the pandemic.
There are lots of lessons, but just taking like things that you appreciate, that you can control about your own personal life, things that you can control for your students' learning experience, and then things that administrators and leaders control. I would say we have the least amount of control over the decisions that our administrators and leaders will make. Like, sure, I would love the school day to actually start at 9 a.m. I don't think that's going to happen when we return to school. No. I have a little bit less control over the learning environment, but there are things I'm thinking about, like, for example, I love that my kids can ask me questions and have some amount of like help each other verbally with their questions in this sort of like counterpoint, which is the chat in the Google Meet. I love that they can help each other and be less disruptive to the lesson through this sort of like B side to the lesson that's happening. Is there any way that can take place in person? And then there's like the whole personal layer, which is where I feel like I have the most control, which is like, how do I just make my own livelihood more manageable so that I'm coming to school a more engaged and better person and teacher? And that revolves around questions like, do I need to maybe take some things off my plate when we return back to school so that I can get back some of this time I will lose to transitions and driving and having kids at my desk asking me questions during lunch and all this stuff? Like, what are sort of these three layers? Like, how sort of thinking, I don't know if we need to talk about leadership and administrative control, because we have, and I don't know how much say we have, but like, what are the things that you want to try to bring to an in-person instruction that are from this online model? And then similarly, like, what are the things you want to keep in your personal life that may have changed?
I don't know if this pandemic will maybe enable to understand more how we teachers are able to provide that. I'm hoping that they will see the amount of emotional burnout that has happened to students and will enable us to be more tuned into that when we go back to school. Deliberate about caring for that in a pandemic, because we don't have the physical proximity to see when a student is in crisis. So we have to prepare ourselves way in advance to make sure that emotional crisis is not going to happen. We tend to underestimate the amount of emotional crisis that can happen to students and only react on it when we see it. And then suddenly we say, oh, I need to involve guidance, I need to do something like that. I think the pandemic has made us more aware that we need to be very proactive about preventing that emotional crisis, because we don't have the signals that we're going to see. We've often been too reactive a community. Okay? When you see evidence of suicidal thinking, then contact us, rather than alter your teaching to dispel any ideas of suicidal thinking before they happen. Right? Let's not load up what we've done in the past, okay? Load up the kids with work and with tests. And when they break, bring in the psychologist. Okay? Load them up until we get to the breaking point. Then we have a system in place for intervention. But we need to get to a system where we don't get to that point, because we need to be aware of our students' needs and emotional needs without waiting for the clues. And I think a lot of teachers are being wonderfully careful about that during the pandemic. They're thinking, how does this feel for me to go through this? How do I see this with my family members? How do I see them coping with this situation? Now, how can I be to make sure that the 30 students in my class are going to be having a stressless time? And I do see a lot of great teachers kind of turning down the stress, right? It's like we're going to get through the same amount of teaching without as many things on the to-do list, you know? To put it in very simple terms, maybe you can prove that you know this mathematical fact by doing 3 problems in the book rather than 30.
Right.
For homework. And so teachers are, I find a lot, are being deliberate because we do have to condense our teaching, but we also have to be aware of an emotional breaking point that we can't see. I'm aware that these emotional breaking points don't happen in the class with the teacher that created the emotional breaking point. If a student is having an emotional breaking point because of their amount of math work, it's not going to be their math teacher they break down in front of. It's somebody else. But the problem is the breaking point is going to happen.
Right.
You know? And so I think we need to learn from this that we need to be thinking first and foremost of our students' emotional health and taking care of that before the crisis point happens. And thinking in the whole picture about 1 in 7 teachers. Every single one. During a regular school year, a student is taking, in a high school, 7 classes at the same time.
Right.
How much, what I'm giving that student in terms of their workload, in terms of how that multiplied by 7 means on a student. And I'm hoping administration and, we have some wonderful people in central office who really do get that.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of extraordinary people, who really do understand the whole child. And I think it's time that we start to listen to them.
Right.
And really look after the emotional health of our children before we look after the fact that they need to take 7 APs. Because they're being told to do that or whatever, and we put this artificial pressure on them without giving them the emotional tools.
Right. And that some of what you're saying does come back to broader reaching, like, sort of leadership decisions. I mean, do you think that, I guess we can speak specifically to our school district. I mean, I know that at the high school and middle school level where we're teaching, we've gone from this 7 class situation to instead a semester, like a more of a college approach where you have 4 classes one half of the year, 4 classes the other. This obviously presents some problems in music, particularly performance. But I do agree that, a teacher who is being really conscious of that stress load, it's just like 4 classes feels a lot less than 7 just because of how many different domains you're juggling conceptually, as a child. There's like less transition time between one activity and the next. There's fewer skills you're trying to grapple and master. I mean, do you see leadership in our district, or it really just, do you think we'll see more globally? Like, do you think we'll see any of these modified schedules or procedures change long-term when schools that are online go back to in-person?
I do not know. And it depends on how much resistance you get from those who believe in the way things always have been.
Right.
And I think they're always a very, very dangerous aspect of what goes on. It's kind of like, that's the way we always did it.
Right.
That I find quite frightening. That we're not willing to make those changes because that's the way we always did it. And so, for example, let's take that's the way we always did it band teacher who says, I can't possibly go into half years because I have to do a winter concert and a spring concert.
Right.
Right? And I can't do that unless I see them all year long. And that sort of person is not willing to rethink the paradigm. And also not understanding that it's not about them. It's about the student and their interaction with music. Or how can I keep a student engaged in music if I'm not teaching them 10 months of the year? You know, well, maybe you're not inspiring them enough during the 4 months of the year, 5 months of the year that you have them, to want to continue to play. And I think that, a lot of music teachers are kind of very dangerous as regards this, about thinking, well, this is the way, rather than think, okay, well, think your typical school band year, begin it with marching band, and then you're into winter concert, and then you're into spring, and then you're into getting ready for graduation, right? And so you have 4 but kind of big chunks. And a lot of band teachers will see that as a movement of gradually getting their band better and better, so that the spring concert should be of a higher standard than the winter concert, yes. And that's also the sort of time when you have festival, when you're hoping to peak. And you spend your marching band time, trying to get something on the field, but also building a lot of bonhomie and a lot of the family relationship of the band. So that, by the time you get to that spring performance and the graduation performance, you've got a band that sounds really, really great and has had a wonderful year working together. But how's about you rethink that? Marching band becomes a separate thing. That the students will sign up for marching band and then will sign up for a different experience with band the next semester, like it is in college. And because we've got into a routine of doing that, I think it becomes a challenge to people that have been teaching for a long time to rethink the way they do band. Because they continually forget that the thing that they're teaching is children. They think that the thing they're teaching is band. And they're not. They're teaching children. They're teaching children through music, and the band is the vehicle for them to do that. You need to rethink the vehicle so that you're still teaching children through music. And there's many, many, many ways to do it. It's just a challenge and a rethink that we have to really do nationwide. Now, I see that particularly in areas where the band tradition is so completely baked in. I recently was on a webinar with a lot of band teachers, and almost every single one of them had a southern accent. It was southern states where the band traditions are really incredibly baked in. And every single one of them, when they presented, they also explained which of the marching band corps they'd been in, right? Oh, I was with the cadets. I marched with the cadets in 2002, and every single one of them, it was like you didn't get to give your biography unless you told which one of the DCI corps you were with. And they really were completely dyed in the wool of teaching band, rather than teaching children.
You're pressing yeah, go ahead.
You're
pressing some of my buttons. Well, I find myself admittedly somewhere in the middle of all of what you're saying, because I am like, pedagogically, you could argue, and I don't want to say old school, because I think that I'm as far from old school in style and approach as can be from like a personality and like how I run a rehearsal kind of standpoint. I do think that, like, structurally I tend to be traditional. Part of that is because that's how I know how to manage my year. But I firmly disassociate myself, and I have nothing wrong with Drum Corps International or marching. It's just it's admittedly not really a big part of my formidable experience. Like, I was never playing in super competitive high school marching bands. So while I did love wearing a snare drum and like the feeling of, like being in the pep band and like marching onto the field, I love that energy, but I never was, really saw that as a competitive thing in quite the way. It's not a part of my experience where I feel like it has formed me into this kind of stereotypical band teacher. I do, however, though, I do feel like with performing skills, there is some, like, I have gotten really good at my trumpet this year. And when I say really good, were comparing me to like last year of me. So when I say really good, I'm saying like I can sort of expect that it'll make the same sound every time I pick it up. Not like, I can hang with my wind ensemble, but what I already knew from experience, but what has been reinforced by a higher degree of performance ability. And I take pride in being able to tell my students this because I tell them this anyway, but now it's like more personal to me because my trumpet skills are a little bit more consistent. I tell them, I'm like, I went literally the weekend without playing my trumpet, and I feel like I sound the same way I did at the beginning of the school year. Like there's something to be said with performing skills that I do feel like there's, benefit to there, being some sort of year-round consistency. I do believe there's somewhat of a ramp up at the end of the year, but I also don't believe that like festival and performing at a high level and just in like everyone seeing how good you are is important at all. In fact, I think we could totally do away with our rating system and all of the things that I think that we could make extreme adaptations to how that all works.
And we're heading that way in Maryland.
We are, yeah. The nuances of that may be subject for a totally different episode of this podcast. But I do like the year-long thing. I kind of understand the reservation about, only for that reason that I feel like one of the things that I'm because I'm not teaching instruments. I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I'm very passionate about instruments, but what I feel like I'm teaching kids is beyond performing. But I do feel like that some of the skills I'm teaching them that go beyond performing do still have this core fundamental association with, here's a thing that I am slowly mastering over the year. Whether that be like, I consider myself to be a teacher of listening. Like that's one of the things that I think I'm teaching my students to do that's broader than playing a trumpet really well. Like listening to sound, but also listening to their world, like being people who are more sensitive to their environments, to other people, to the needs of others, growing more empathy. I believe I'm teaching teamwork. And that you do, especially if you're like a touchy-feely kind of person who does really depend on developing that sense of family. Like, I get that feeling like, hey, I need the year. But I also am with you that, we have to be a lot more flexible in general.
Okay. What if I told you that the United States is one of the only countries in the world where band, orchestra, choir are classes? In most other countries, music is a study. It is a class that you do, and band, orchestra, chorus are extracurricular. We have forced band, orchestra, and choir into becoming curricular things because we said, well, we need all the time at the end of the day for sports and other activities. If instead you could teach music, a class during the day, but yet have a band rehearsal after school every day, in which you could develop the skills of listening which you teach in music class. You probably don't get much time to teach oral skills. You probably don't get to actually do dictation with your students. You don't actually probably in a band class ever get to play them a chord sequence and have them pull out some manuscript paper and write that down. And that's a vital, vital skill. You probably don't get enough of time to teach improvisation. You might get that if you have an after-school jazz band or if you have a curricular jazz band. Improvisation is a vital part of making music. Absolutely vital. And more vital all the time. And yet we don't have time to teach it because we've put band rehearsal and choir rehearsal and orchestra rehearsal in the place in the day where students are not studying music. And what we end up doing is actually bringing those kids back at the end of the day to teach them improvisation in band class, or to teach them, to sit down with them and teach them oral skills. We find we have made it the wrong way round because we've said there's not time in the day to teach music. Let's put band rehearsal there instead. And so what we find is that we have a number of teachers who are teaching to the festival. Let me get my band as good sounding as possible for a festival. And the whole pandemic is going to challenge that, rather than thinking, how do I make my kids musical? How do I get them to love music? and then also put them in a band because they want to make music together and then perform with that band. Right? And so what has happened is that band has come to the point of actually getting in the way of music teaching. And I know a lot of people will have difficulty hearing that. But, you know, improvisation is a major part of the old standards. It's a major part of the new standards. And yet so many times we see maybe it's done in 1 or 2 classes. And that's it. And yet we have styles of music which are moving more and more and more towards improvisation. We have an approach to music which is about reproduction. And that's very appropriate for the classical world. We take what somebody else has written and we recreate it in a live performance. And we spend a lot of our time in the classroom working about what it is that those composers' directions were, the way that they wrote things, the choices that they made as regards dynamics, as regards articulation, as regards, you know, tempo and tempo flow. And we spend a lot of our time working that out, so that what happens is we end up going on stage to create a recreation of what they did on stage. Jazz is a type of music which does not deal with recreation. We only try to recreate when we want to learn from the skills of the masters. We might transcribe a Charlie Parker solo and try to play it, so that we want to get into the mind of what Charlie Parker was doing. But it would be inappropriate to go on stage and just play the Charlie Parker solo straight down. Okay? In rock and roll, we have an approach where it is a nod of tribute to do an established song, a cover song. But a lot of that's important in rock and roll is about your own stuff, making up your own solo, making up your own things. And as we move gradually down that list, we also gradually move the music stand away. Right? In classical music, there will always be a music stand. People will be playing from the dots. In jazz, you could be sitting there with a stand in front of you which has the chart on it, has the lead sheet, but you stand up and you give a solo away from that. In rock and roll, there's no music stand on stage. Nobody in rock would go on stage with a music stand. Okay? Now in hip-hop, which has been around for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. We certainly don't treat it that way in public school education.
40 years. To cover somebody else's song is taboo. You would never go on stage and say, I'm going to perform a Run DMC song exactly as Run DMC produced it. Okay? You're not going to do that. It is completely opposite. Improvisation is central to hip-hop. And it is expected that you will perform a song a different way whenever you perform it. When we see, people that freestyle, it is absolutely, it is a mark of shame to repeat something that you've done in an earlier performance. But yet, still in school, we're stuck at saying the music stand will always be in front of you. We will interpret according to what the composer wanted and according to what I think about it. And we'll only improvise maybe twice a year. And maybe I'll give you, a simple chord sequence and you'll learn to play a little rhythm along the chord sequence. And so that, the direction that music is going, particularly the music that children are listening to, is getting further and further and further away from what we do in the classroom. Rather than have a classroom where what we do is we learn to experience our instrument. We learn to experiment with our instrument. We learn about the literature that's there for the instrument. We learn about those great players, the Charlie Parkers and the Sidney Bechet's of this world. And we learn about them, and we learn about the interests, and we learn about those people that look like us, the women and the black artists and the Native American artists and the Latino artists, and we learn about them, and we learn to see ourselves in the music that we start to create our identity with. And then we have an opportunity to come together as a band with all our musical experience and with all the richness that we have. And we have a band after school, and we love to come to band every day and rehearse, but we are enriched by what we've done in music class during the day. What's happening more and more is that we're getting to this point where we are dictating what will enrich the children by selling them on Lincolnshire Posy. Oh, we're going to do Lincolnshire Posy because it's the greatest piece of band literature ever written. That's what we're going to do, and we're going to take it to festival. And we're going to spend our year doing that. All right? And we come along and we create a great, performance of Lincolnshire Posy. And of course that has its merits. But ultimately what happens is the kid, 20 years later, I see in the grocery store, says, I played saxophone in school, but I just never picked it up after high school.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real shame. I wish I'd kept playing the saxophone. And the reason they didn't play the saxophone after high school is because they suddenly were taken away from the thing that was telling them what to do. And we never gave them the power. We never gave them the agency to make that decision themselves on their interest in the saxophone, why they played it, the people they could listen to, the community that could engage them with the instrument. All we did is we made their saxophone world the four other kids in the section and what we did within that band room. Honestly, a lot of what we do as well in terms of ensemble stuff is often pressured by administration. We feel that there is a need to produce a winter concert, there is a need to produce a spring concert, so that it does feed into this idea that the band class becomes rehearsal.
Exactly, right.
Because there is the pressure to succeed. And I see this as well with, even in the pandemic, unfortunately, I know that, I do see on the music teachers Facebook page and the music educators creating online learning page as well, people who are being asked by their administrators to create virtual bands and virtual choirs. And the administrators can't get out of the paradigm that band has to be about a product.
Right. Well,
and I really don't think band teachers do think that way. I just think that there is often this pressure to produce a product which removes their want to take time to teach improvisation, to teach listening, and that sort of thing. And I know that there's many a band teacher that would love to have a day where they get off the podium and say, let's listen to these folk songs that Vaughan Williams put in the folk song suite. Let's talk about what they're about. Let's talk about the different versions about them. Let's talk about the history of how these folk songs were collected. There'll be days which would be lovely, but I think often a band teacher and a choir teacher and an orchestra teacher feel this pressure that they have to be on the podium every day, shaping the music. And I think it's very important that one of the things that we do is we get away from these rated adjudications, because that number can be quite arbitrary. To spend your whole time, you could spend 120 rehearsals getting to the point where somebody reduces it to a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And also getting away from this idea of curated lists. I'm very glad.
That's a huge agree from me. Yeah, you're hitting at so many things that I think are interesting to pick at. First of all, I'm leaving it all in because I do disagree, not fundamentally, but with some of the details you're saying. But I also I'm a very specific kind of band teacher. So when band teachers hear the kind of way you're talking, I think they immediately are stricken with fear, that.
Absolutely.
That there's a danger that their way is gone. And I'll be the first person to tell you that I would be devastated if there was a universe where I couldn't go see something that, where I couldn't go see Brahms performed by the National Symphony Orchestra. I think that's a valuable part of culture. Yes. I think it's a valuable thing. It's something that I want in my life that I appreciate because I have studied it to the degree that I have. But I think that there's room for more without that being diminished.
That's exactly what I'm saying, is that we need to make more time for the other skills, not just the recreative skill.
And I think people are, offended for a number of reasons. I try to think of the reasons why am I most offended. I mean, I do think that there is value in, and I guess it just comes down to how do you define, because there's two words you keep using that I are like fundamental to how I teach and what I believe, but I think they can be perceived of and thought of differently depending on what you teach and how you teach it and how you approach it. And those two words are process and creativity. And I do think that performing arts are not nearly process oriented enough. And it gets so tricky to talk about because I have this conversation with every band teacher I ever talk to. It's about process. It's not about product. But then I watch the way that some of my colleagues in the field actually teach, and I still get the sensation that it's really about preparing for the concert. And and there might be people who are saying the same thing about me because I preach the process, but maybe there are people who think that I'm actually just really focused on the performance. It's hard because, the performance is, I think of it like that. I mean, like you've read Ender's Game, right?
No.
Really? Oh man, I'll have to cut this then because I can't spoil the ending. Let me, it's definitely a book that has applicable philosophies to, everything depending on how you read it. So I'll just put it this way. Like I do, like a concert obviously looks and feels different for a number of logistic reasons, but it is, and I talked about this in an interview. Rob Knopper is one of the percussionists in the Metropolitan Opera, and he's going to be the guest in the next episode. And, we talked about auditioning a lot, which is something that he obviously thinks about and reflects on a lot because he's like a practicing orchestral musician. It's not a path that I ever, even though I have my master's degree in classical percussion, that's just not a path I ever wanted to go. But he talks about, like failed auditions being process oriented. And like, what does that mean? Like if you don't get an audition you want, it like defines your life. And he's like, well, they're data points. I am fueled creatively by how I want to grow as a musician by losing the audition. And when your goal is to achieve a sound, not to win a job, yes, you have to eat, but so you want the job, and there are certain jobs that you want more than other jobs, and it hurts to not get the job that you want. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of failure, even as a performing musician. And if you look at those sort of like moments that we think of as product-based, like auditions and performances, if you look at those instead as data points for getting better, then all of a sudden you can view those kinds of things differently. Now, I think there are still a lot of performing arts teachers who think of the adjudicated event, like late spring or early spring, as their everything. And the way that they are rated defines their perception of themselves and their students for the entire year. And that is what we need to get away from. We could even talk about, do we need the number? Because I actually believe even that a number can be a constructive teaching tool, but not if the attitude is the way that I see it amongst band teachers, where the number, like where the one is the only way that you have value as a teacher or a musician.
Right. And I think that is a very valid point to say that the adjudication themselves, the comments themselves, can be incredibly enlightening. But often, unfortunately, these things come so close to the end of the year. And then, of course, the next year, you have different people, different kids sitting in different chairs. And how does what you learned in April of last year apply in September? That these are all, data points would be wonderful. It would be wonderful to have multiple data points through the career of a band. But oftentimes that band is like a year's band. And then these adjudication points, sometimes get lost in just this almighty one number. Now, I know some band directors who will take several lessons to go over those comments and to talk about what that means for the whole band, and I think those are wonderful. And I also know some people that will not share the comments with the students, They just move it on. And they said, oh, okay, well, we got this score, so, oh, well, there we go. And yes, and I think it is a very, very valuable point. The point about auditions is that these, of course, can come multiple times during a musician's life. And many times they will continue even when they get a particular gig, continue to take other auditions, because that will encourage their learning. And I think that's a wonderful thing. That's not the same in the band world when it's only a year and when you're trying to get ready for a spring concert or for a festival.
Sure.
And I'm also very wary, again, about literature which is list-based, in which the list cannot see the colour and the gender of the students sitting in those chairs. And that concerns me a lot.
You mean it does not represent them? The names of the composers does not represent them?
It cannot see them. The list cannot see the students.
Yeah,
a list does not have eyes.
I have several problems with the list, and you're hinting at just one of many of them. I mean, I think that the list, okay, so I think where the list comes from is that it supposes that the director does not have, I don't want to say the authority, but does not have the taste to select not only music that is perceived as good by a large body of culture, but that is appropriate developmentally for their students. And I agree that there are teachers who do not have that, and it's a process, like anything we've been talking about. I am getting better at repertoire and expanding my idea of repertoire by learning about more repertoire, by learning how the repertoire I choose affects my students, both socially and emotionally. Also, like from a purely pedagogical standpoint, like does it help me to develop the musical skills I want to? I'm learning more, but there's certainly, like, I get the problem that a list is trying to establish some sort of standard. The problem is that, and I'm learning, this is a huge discussion, especially in the band community, is that everybody says, it's that same thing I was hinting at before. Like, everyone is saying the same thing, but meaning a different thing. We say, band directors everywhere say this. They say, well, it doesn't matter who it's composed by. It just matters if it's good music. And I want to agree with that statement, except for that we all think we have the same definition of good, but actually none of us do. Everyone is choosing a definition of good that is problematic for any list of reasons, not the least of which being your own experience and what kinds of music has shaped your experience as an educator and as a teacher and musician. So
here's where that's answered. Okay? What do you do when a child asks you about Percy Granger's private life?
I don't play at the middle school level a ton. I have.
It's Granger, incredible band composer.
Sure.
Right? But so many teaching Granger will steer away from ever discussing who he was as a person. And I would see in Britain, when I was there, him represented as British. When he's not, he's Australian. Right. If you have to avoid a conversation about somebody, does that person then represent your students? Does that person's interest in English folk music represent your American kids sitting in front of you? There is so much incredible American wind band repertoire that takes into consideration American music, that takes into consideration the vast and incredible musical experiences of this country. But yet, people still continue to program Granger under the guise of it's good music. Yes, it is great music. It is the greatest there ever was in wind band repertoire. I will absolutely agree with that. But if we have to avoid that conversation about Granger, how is that representing those children? How is that making them feel, I want to be part of that band? Rather than saying, let us take this melody Shenandoah. Let us learn what it is about. Let us see how that represents us in American culture. America is unfortunately too embarrassed by its own culture. And it continues to cling to Western European ideals when since then America has given us jazz, rock and roll, gospel, hip-hop, funk, soul. It has given us all these things. I see it incredible when I see bands which are doing music which is soul-based and which is jazz-based. I absolutely love to see that. And I love to see the engagement that these kids have in it. Sometimes even in the Macy's parade on Thanksgiving, you'll see a band coming down and they are high-stepping and they are funking it out on this music. And you know that they feel so connected. And then you have another band that comes down in the Western European tradition of being very stoic and doing everything exactly according to the page. And you see that those kids are not as engaged. They're doing it because they've been told to do that. And they're not realizing the representation. America must realize that there is this incredible tradition of music which started after the majority of the major classical composers were dead. You know, and we keep going back to Bach, Beethoven. We keep going back to that. But yet they were gone before America was even, you know, before the War of Independence. And America has created incredible music. And one of the things that America does as well, which is so beautiful, and I feel this very strongly because I'm Irish, but I now count myself as Irish American. And I am allowed to do that because America has welcomed me. Right? When I lived in England, I could never be Irish English. No. But what I've learned is that I welcome this incredible American tradition. And I feel proud to be a part of it. And we do this with the kids. With the kids, we call them Latino American, African American. We acknowledge their heritage and say, yes, you're American as well. And this is important. And I think we have to realize that the one thing that the kids sitting in front of us have in common is that they're American. Mm-hmm. And realize that we have such a vast repertoire. That we don't have to just do Percy Grainger for the sake of Percy Grainger. And I will keep saying, I love Percy Grainger. I did my master's thesis, research on Grainger. I absolutely adore Grainger.
I know why you keep bringing him up, because there are band directors who are like unfulfilled in their life, and we keep bringing up band directors too because we're a typical stereotype of this kind of this kind of behavior. But like this idea that if you don't perform Grainger, like that you're not a worthy person.
That's the one you have to check that off the list.
You're like an incomplete
before you.
Yeah, and I've never felt that way. Love that piece. Love all that music. I've never felt that way personally, but I do, and this is where I think I can maybe bridge this gap, or at least kind of explain some like the predicament that we're in. There is a logistic overhead to teaching a 65-person class with over 12 different instruments represented. There is, you know, for a long time I was a band leader at a church where there's in that kind of church community, there's like particular kinds of like rock and pop songs that are expected to be played. And because of that consistency of those songs, there are entire industries dedicated to licensing those arrangements. There are entire industries dedicated to licensing you to download the Ableton Live samples so that you can fill in all the synthesizer loops and stuff. And I engaged with all that when I was doing this job. And it was just so fascinating to me that to do it in this way, like had birthed all of these different logistics and industries that, because you do kind of, I mean, I get it, but you also sort of like paint yourself into a corner. It's like, how do I then do anything else if part of my responsibility creatively hinges now on the creativity of what other people have made? Well, now I can't slightly take even just the slightest right turn because now all of those resources are unavailable to me, and what I'm doing creatively is now inconsistent with what I was doing 5 minutes ago. So there's definitely these same industries. We have publishing industry, we have like sheet music distributing, we have young, this is the big thing, is young band composers who write specifically for the exact instrumentation that I have in my band. But I think that what we are seeing, fortunately, is we are seeing younger people now are starting to come up and compose music that is what I call like roots music. Like, and I mean, music that's true to what originally sparked them. And that could be, and is in a lot of cases, rock, jazz, hip hop music that people who, you know, grew up listening to that but they also grew up with a fondness for the concert band. And we're using band. You could easily use orchestra or choir, whatever. Just to stay in my lane here for a second. We have these composers who are now, and they're writing gospel music. They're writing music that's influenced by hip hop, but they're not writing in that style. And then they're like, oh, well, what do I do with the flutes? It should just play some romantic era run up and down in the background. They're saying, no, what actually makes sense authentically in this style? And they're rethinking that instrumentation. And I think that is hopefully going to help us to take a positive turn.
I would agree. And a problem is how long it then takes for that stuff to get on the list.
Right.
So I think one of the things is that music should be becoming instantly available and being picked up. I see it a lot in choir stuff. I see a lot of choral stuff coming in very quickly. Young people who are looking at the cultures which we have in the American classroom and writing music that represents that. The advantage of a choral group is that it has a smaller wheel arch. It turns quicker, right? You can do a choral piece, right? And rehearse it and learn it. And it doesn't require the same logistics as doing a band piece, even if it's the same length. It right. is just a ship that turns easier, right? The wheelbase just makes it that way. Trying to program one piece of band music requires such a logistic thing. But what if band was given the same status and support as the football team? Right? The football is not a class, right?
Right.
You don't take football during the day. What you have is a teacher, archetypally a phys ed teacher, who is employed to teach physical education to every class, to every child in the building, but is also paid and supported with support staff to put a championship-winning team on the field. What if instead we said that band is something that is paid for by the school and supported by support staff, and I said to you, you during the day get to teach all the children in school in music, and after school you get paid to run a rehearsal, which by the way is sacrosanct. Nobody can ever interfere with your rehearsal, such as happens with football practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get paid and you get support staff to run sectionals. You get to employ Maggie Shorb to come along and work with your saxophones. And what you do is then you get the chance to put a great, great band on the stage or on the field. And the same thing with the choir teacher. You are allowed to teach music, but in the afternoons, you get 2 hours to run choir. You wouldn't have conflicting schedules where a kid can't take band because they have to take Spanish 3, and it locks against that in the system. Kids can come into band, even if they don't get band class in a particular year, they can come back the next year. And you get kids who are invested in this, and you get the support of administration to say, we are doing this because we value the quality of your band just as much as we value the quality of our football team. And you get a community that supports that. Because, our football coach teaching PE, well, what's he doing with the kids? He's getting them lifting, right? Mm-hmm. That's huge. He's teaching them a lot of the skills which they need on the football team while he's teaching them PE. And he's also getting some kids that normally wouldn't be interested, and he's influencing them, and he's able to bring them into the football team because he's got the chance. In music, you have the chance, if you get to see everybody, really developing their skills, developing their musical skills, and then bringing them into your band as your extra thing, which, is valued by the school. Right now, band is valued by schools, but it's not valued at the same level as the football team.
Do you think that that's a reflection of, that's a chicken and egg problem to me? I wonder,
yes.
we put as a culture so many, we've sort of made athletics what they are. In many ways, they reflect
right.
how we ourselves more than it's like we put those procedures in place. and then we're just stuck with them.
Right. Well, we have said that you must have a PE credit at school, right? Because you must be taking care of your body. You must learn that. Okay? And football is extra, right? But we've said that you must have a fine art credit, and band can be one of them. Now, say, for example, being on the football team could be your PE credit. You know?
Yeah.
That's a difference.
It is a difference. I'm still, here's where I'm stuck. This is where, and I don't know that I like outright disagree with you necessarily, as much as I just like, I actually think that there is something, okay, so a football experience could be less well-rounded. I think what you're arguing is that it would be far less rounded than a general physical education.
Yes.
But, and do I really want to use the buzzword rigor? I feel like I don't have a better word to use. Like, there is definitely a rigor to, part of which is introduced by the very same competition that we were just advocating against in the music world. Mm-hmm. But competition certainly does have a place. I think it's often framed completely in an unhealthy and incorrect way in the way that we, teach our students and our young people. But I do think that there's like a rigor and a competitiveness to it that pushes you. You know what I mean? Like when you say, here's the kind of skill I want to have, or rather, here's the concept, here's the goal that I have, and that goal is broader and wider reaching, then you have to then work hard at the technical skills which help you to meet that goal. Like, I still would say that is a healthy process. I don't know if it's for everyone, and I would definitely argue that we would be missing a lot of students if the only opportunity for you was to do football. Like, we would obviously, maybe that's what you're arguing, is like there are students musically, and this is why one of the reasons why I do appreciate that I have a general music class in my schedule is because I do feel like there are reasons why performing arts are structured the way that they are, but I also do feel like they're missing kids. And like, listen, like, sure, it could have been a bad relationship with the director is why a kid stopped playing saxophone after the 5th grade. But I think it's also possible that that kid wants to express themselves in a different way musically. And this is why I think that there's room for everything to be uplifted without diminishing the creative value of one kind of musical direction or another, is because I do think we're way behind in getting popular music into our curriculum.
Yes.
But I do also see this value in, I don't want to say value in tradition, because it's not that I like teaching band because it is the way that it always is, but I do see there being this value in the rigor of like having a wide ranging, sometimes abstract musical goal, and then learning as a human being how to break apart that goal into various technical skills and then learning them at a high level. Like, that is a process that excites me. But I don't think that either should diminish the other. And this is coming from someone who's taken the time to like steep themselves in rock music and hip hop and jazz. But not all of my students have the opportunity to do that because they're not given one in the public school system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's complicated.
It is complicated, but I do wonder sometimes if we have ended up with with band, orchestra, and choir being put into the curriculum and how it might diminish what we can do for all students.
There's still an elitism. There's still an elitism, a firm belief that comes even from the highest levels of leadership that if you don't know how to read a quarter note, that there's no valuable musicianship. And I, as someone who loves music theory and studied classically, I think those are integral and valuable parts of a student's well-rounded music education. But I also think it's crazy to say that there's no way that you can be musical without knowing that skill. It's obviously not true. And it comes down to how you value the style and the context of different kinds of music. Like, I would argue, like, I had a school administrator say to me once, like, do you think that, like, you can be a musician and not know how to read a quarter note? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Do you think that, like, every hip hop producer knows how to read a quarter note? Well, maybe not, but is that, and then it just becomes like it's an entirely separate conversation about how do we value this music. And, I think, like, as long as sound waves all sound, in our physical universe scientifically in the same way, I mean, all sound is sound. How we perceive and find meaning in that sound, it really has nothing to do with the perceived complexity at which it's created or artistically produced. So
yeah,
there's a room for all of it.
Absolutely. And we do have, of course, many examples of great general music teaching. I know many great general music teachers and great proponents of what we call the electives in high school, where kids can continue to take music without having to audition on saxophone. Right. I love the choir experience because there is no gateway to being in choir. You show up, you can be in a choir and learn from the first day. You might have to audition to be in a higher level choir.
Sure.
And though sometimes in 9th grade, you might even have to audition to be in the lowest level band. And if you've no idea what end of the saxophone to blow down, you might not be allowed into the band because you've never picked one up before. And I think that is a gateway problem. And that can disenfranchise kids who would just like to study music.
My choir teacher in high school would be at football practice the week before school and would be like recruiting, trying to get basically a bass section for the choir. There was only one choir in my school.
Yep.
It was a very, very high level performing choir. And I just remember to myself, even as a high school student, like being sort of, not even like having taken a stark interest in music education yet, but just being keenly aware of like, what is she doing? Like how, and then by the end of the year, just thinking like, oh man, she has made musicians out of all of us. Like we are all performing at the same level and communicating emotionally at the same level as one another. How did she do that? Well, she was a good teacher. Exactly. She did that. Yeah. Cynthia Stevens.
Yes.
Made musicians out of us all. It's like, you feel like it sounds like the plot of like a movie about a choir, like that, like the eccentric music teacher is on the football field in the opening scene. But it's like, really, she truly did that. She's like, we have untapped resources here of potential musicianship, and I know how to take them from point A to point B. And so here I am. Come join the choir.
Exactly. And, choir teachers are very happy. Choir teachers are very happy when the door opens mid-year and guidance brings them another student and says, right, this student's never done music, but they want to be in choir. Okay? Now, if that happened halfway through the year in a band, and you're 3 rehearsals away from doing Lincolnshire Posy Festival, and the door opens, and this kid gets shoved in and says, this kid wants to learn to play saxophone, so he's put in your class. There you go. Yeah. And we'll expect him on the concert in 3 weeks. Playing Lincolnshire Posy. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about being at Ellicott Mills is we have 4 bands, and we have, fortunately, the support of our administrative staff too. Like I teach our concert band, which is a class that you can do that in the middle of the year. It will be very hard for me logistically if it happens in March rather than in August, but there is a place for that student. And if that student, as we find every year, if the student wants to be there and wants to work for it, they'll be fine.
Bless you for that.
Some of our surprise successes are kids who are just, what's even more of a surprise is like when they even are like a little bit, not apprehensive, but even like just kind of trying it out. Like they're not like gung-ho, like I live to play the saxophone and I just never had the opportunity till the 8th grade. No, like kids who are just like, yeah, sure. I mean, like this seems okay. And then they just suddenly take to it. Yeah, it's always cool. Well, here's to a more inclusive and wider ranging musical curriculum. And
that's all I really want is for every child to have an opportunity for us to remove the barriers, to remove this idea that you cannot be in music because the structure of what we do in music in our school does not represent who you are right now. I'm an urban kid. I want to play drums because I love making beats. Well, I'm sorry, we don't have a place for you in band, so music is not going to be where you are. We have to make an inclusive place where music is available to all kids.
Right.
And yes, the band is important, but that cannot be the only way that kids are allowed to learn and express music. It is great for those that choose it, but it can't be the only way, and we have to be creative about making sure that all students have this opportunity to take music not only as one semester in high school, but 4 years. And those opportunities are available to them, all throughout high school.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Great closing words. Do you mind if I like pivot to some other smaller topics?
Yeah.
Since
go ahead.
You capped that super well. So I feel like we could cap it there, or just go on for another 8 hours about this subject, because I'm passionate about it.
You and I could, Robby. You know that. We live close enough, and we have several restaurants, which in better times, I'm sure we will be able to sit in until closing time and discuss these elements.
Well, and coming back to my thing about like, what are the things you'd like to keep, any positive changes you'd like to keep. I mean, I don't know if it's just that I'm not doing anything, that it's far easier to Zoom people who are in my life. And when I say Zoom, I don't mean like in that fatiguing sort of like, let's add a meeting to our day. I just mean in that like I have friends who live in California who I'm lucky if I get 2 4-hour conversations a year with them. And it's just like, they're just another FaceTime away now, as someone in Maryland who's also stuck at home. So I don't know what the source of the problem is, if it's just the hustle of everyday life, but I would really like to get to a point where it is much easier for this kind of thing to happen spontaneously and at a bar instead of through a computer.
Sure. Absolutely. So, app of the day and album of the day.
Yeah,
is that the way you normally wrap up?
I do. Yeah, we can go in any order you want.
Oh, I don't mind.
Well, I just happen to have put my app first. And so I'll choose app. I'll go first. I'll do app first. I think you will appreciate this as a deeply curious individual that you are. Are you on Reddit at all?
No, rarely.
So here's the thing about, and this also connects to our current state of things. Like, people are spending more time online, and that can have all sorts of different varying effects on your mental health. I like the utility of being able to connect with communities online, but I don't like some of the toxic stuff that comes with necessarily, online communities. So one of the things that I've really found in my life is that I actually, through the power of the internet and tools, I can curate my online communities and actually find communities of people online that I would never have locally or at a friend or a family level. So in other words, connections that are not so much analogous to my real life relationships, but rather these like separate internet powered things. And so one of the things I'd use is Reddit. So I'm sure most people listening have heard of Reddit. It's a social news site. People post links and photos and pictures and things, and then they get upvoted or downvoted. And then every posting has like a comment feed of, a thread of comments on that. And Reddit is also itself one of the most toxic places on the internet, depending on where you go. But what I like about Reddit is that you can make an account and then you can unsubscribe from all of the mainstream stuff that comes by default with a Reddit account. And then you can subscribe only to very, very small, specific communities tailored to your interests. So, and I find that the smaller they are, the less toxic they are. So, I can subscribe to stuff about Apple. I can subscribe to stuff about making coffee, making craft cocktails, making specifically the bitters that would go in those. I can subscribe to nerd board games, to jazz, people who love jazz improvisation. And I can just have a news feed of all of my interests where I'm not depending on some algorithm to determine what news articles I want to see or what my friends and family have posted. But instead, what I have determined that I like and that's going to bring me joy when I open my phone up and want to browse. So the best experience for using Reddit that I have found is an app called Apollo. Okay. And it's for iOS, and it's really quite a delight. It makes Reddit feel less garbagey and more like,
Cool. I will look that one up and install that one.
Yeah,
if something that makes Reddit less garbagey would be great.
The main thing I tell people is unsubscribe from all the main, you don't want to be in any of the major groups that it subscribes you to. Like get out of all of them. Get out of world news. What are you asking for if you want another place where you can have people post world news links and then have to read people's opinions on them on the internet? Come on. And Apollo is just designed, the developer is named Christian, I think Selig is how you pronounce his last name. He's a younger guy. He develops the app all by himself. And Reddit is cool because even though they're not a perfect website, they do release a lot of APIs, which basically means like hooks. People can develop third-party applications that hook into almost all of the major features of Reddit. So you don't feel like you're getting that much of a different experience than Reddit, but the interface and visuals on screen feel far more like you're using a really nice iPhone app.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Apollo.
I have installed it.
Nice.
Thank you. That's the reason I was looking down when you were saying.
I got you.
Got my phone right here. So it is installed, and I will play with that later on. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yes, I find myself belonging to too many Facebook groups and stuff like that.
I was going to actually put it in the topic list for today, but I'm glad I didn't now.
I should read you this conversation which happened on a Facebook group yesterday. All right? And then this is when I decided I need to leave this group. Okay? People are saying, this is, one person, and then I'll read the conversation. Person A, people are out here spending $700 on a VH140S when this thing is pretty much the same thing. Reply, I've had both. I know this is based off the VH140S, but I don't think they sound the same. Person 1 again, stop it now, you're actually just making me want an actual VH140S even more, LOL. Person 3, hey, have you guys ever tried a ZK130 Twec Tech? I'm like, come on, it's time for me to leave that group. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know what a Twec Tech is and what a ZH140 is. But I'm looking at this conversation thinking, I don't need this in my newsfeed every day. People discussing a VH130S versus a ZH130 Twec Tech. So, my favorite app right now is a thing called Jamzone. And I have used this so much. It's available for Android, it's available for iOS, it's available for Mac. There isn't a PC version of it yet, but I presume there will be. And Jamzone is so much fun because it enables you to play cover versions of songs, and it will play the song for you with the lyrics and the chords. And you also have a mixing board at the bottom where you can change the volumes of the individual instruments in the mix. And you can mute stuff. So, for example, if you want to mute the bass guitar line because you want to work on playing bass guitar, you can do that. Or if you want to solo the bass guitar part so you hear that on its own, you can do that. The cover versions are actually pretty good. Mm-hmm. And they usually try to get a vocalist that quite well matches the vocal. And their transcription of the chords is very, very good for similar apps that I've seen. You can transpose, so that's really nice, that if something is uncomfortable in the key, then you can transpose it. I have noticed a couple of little bugs with that. If you transpose, for example, if the original chord is C, it'll come out as C flat, which kind of will confuse my kids a little bit rather than B or whatever. Just a couple of little bugs. You can also slow down the track by 5%, 10%, 15%. So that's nice that you can take something at like 10% speed and then, gradually work it up to speed. And what you do is you just use your iTunes account to unlock credits. Each credit costs about $2. And you have a library that you build up of songs that you teach. And there's also a lot of free ones. Yeah. So you can start, for example, House of the Rising Sun is one of the free ones. And I mean, that's a standard for us that teach guitar to learn and to learn to improvise over.
Right.
And so there's a lot of good free ones that you can use, but then you can search for songs and unlock them. And the good thing is your library just goes with you, whether you're logging in on your computer or your iPad or your Android or your phone. And so it's really nice that it just syncs everything. So anywhere I am, if I'm teaching from home, I can play from Jamzone, and I play it through a Bluetooth speaker so the kids can hear it in my microphone, and we can play along with stuff. When I'm back in school, I'll be able to play stuff directly from my phone or from a computer if I have a Mac. And then, you can project it and the kids can see the chords. One of the things I really also like about it, which is so important, is there is a setting for audio latency. And there is also a setting for trackpad, so that you can, if you are working in a system where you are accounting for latency, For example, I said I was sending it to my Bluetooth speaker. I have to make sure I've set that. Otherwise, the kids are going to see the chart at a different place than what they're hearing, which of course is confusing. And being able to do a split track pan is almost like the old days of Music Minus One, or the Abersold recordings where you can set everything to one channel and then hear it in your left ear and hear yourself in your right. So I'm really, really pleased with this app. I think it's got a lot of great stuff that's going for it. Any little bugs that I see, I just explain it to the kids, because it's not perfect, nothing is. But for what it is, to be able to find songs and to be able to have kids play along with them and to hear the parts broken down and to see the chords for the way I teach, it's absolutely wonderful. So I really love Jamzone. And if you Google it, you will go straight there. If you Google Jamzone, by the way, you might also end up accidentally at littlekids.rock, their Jamzone, which, by the way, is also incredible. Mm-hmm. I love Little Kids Rock, and their Jamzone part of their website is wonderful. So if you accidentally go to the wrong place, doesn't matter. You will still be getting somewhere wonderful if you search for Jamzone. So I'd strongly recommend it for anybody that's teaching rock and roll and folk and blues and those sorts of styles.
Middle high school me with my acoustic guitar locked in my bedroom would have loved something like this.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's crazy. All of this stuff, it's like I think about often about the productivity tools that would have helped me in college that have, like with research and stuff, that have only become prominent since I was a student. And then this reminds me of things that would have really motivated me musically back in those days.
I will tell you a dirty little secret. About half the tracks that I have bought are for class, and about half of them are for me.
Yeah.
And they're songs that I just love to sit at home and play.
Right.
And I just get out my guitar and I go into the zone of playing along these things just like I did along with the record back when I was a kid. Playing along with a Pink Floyd tune, which I did on a record player back in the 70s. Now I can go on Jamzone, I can find the song, and I can do that. And another good thing about it is that the form of the song is laid out at the top of the app.
Right. Yeah, that's helpful.
So you can definitely tell kids, let's go back to verse 3, let's look at the bridge. But also, you can loop a section or multiple sections just by selecting those. So if you want to say, okay, I want to just learn to play a solo over the instrumental section of Lola by the Kinks. So I can buy Lola by the Kinks on my account. I can find that solo section. I can take out the original solo, and I can just loop that section over and over again. I can try it in different keys. I can try it at different speeds, and it works. And I've also found that it's really nice and motivational for my guitar kids, because when we do unlock a song, we always try it at 90%, and they learn it at 90%. Mm-hmm. And then when we get it up to 95 and then 100%, they think they've they've nailed it. Yeah. And they think they're playing along with the band. And you remember what that experience was like when you were a kid. I'm sure you probably, sat with a drum kit and played along with the band with your headphones on. Yeah,
but there was none of this like easy slow downer app stuff, or these practice tools were not out yet. And it was like, it was like records. Like you couldn't go on YouTube and then use a YouTube downloader and then take the resulting track and then slow it down to 60, 70%, So right. If you wanted to figure out like a tough Dennis Chambers fill or something, you just had to like listen to it over and over and over again at full speed and do your best to transcribe it.
But my brother was a drummer, and what he used to do was he would take the single 45 and put it on 33.
Right.
Because he was only listening to the pitch didn't matter to him. It didn't matter that it came out flat. He just wanted to hear the drum licks. So he would listen to it at 33, work it out, and then speed it up to 45 RPM and then play it.
Yeah.
But that's the only thing you could do. Or the other thing you could do as well is you could lean something against the turntable, which would slow it down.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
You could slow it down artificially, but that probably wasn't very good for the belt inside your record player. Yeah, so Jamzone is my recommendation on that.
Right on. I dig it. I'm going to download it, check it out, have some fun.
and buy yourself 10 credits and have fun. Start off with 10 credits. And I've told my kids, that, for example, if you're using this, ask mom if the next time she goes to Walgreens or Target or Giant, can she pick you up an iTunes card? And then you can use that. If she buys you a $20 iTunes card, you've just bought yourself 10 songs that you can add to your repertoire and you can practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth it.
So good. So cool.
Free app, but, I have absolutely no problem paying $2 a song to unlock something so I can jam with it, or something that I can have my kids jam with.
It's, it's funny. It's like, it's a sensible model to me for pricing, because it seems like obvious what I think is, people, at least in young people, I think even sort of vaguely remember this idea of like paying for a song, even in the streaming era, so it's like, it's hard to criticize, them for the work they're doing. I'm not one to criticize software developers for asking for money for any kind of way, because I know that they need to eat. But it's one of these things where it's like, the barrier to entry is low, but then you can sort of like add to the experience when you're ready to pay more. Yeah.
Another thing I like about it, which you'll discover as you get into it, is the way they crowdsource ideas for what they're going to do next. You will find that if you search for something and it hasn't been done yet, it'll be available that you can vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, the more they get certain hits, certain titles, which they haven't developed yet, then they'll think, you know what? We got, 40 hits on Hotel California. We probably need to make that one happen.
Sure.
Rather than them try to go in the dark and guess what people want, they're allowing people to, to show them what they want. And of course, they're probably also, it does store a history of your searches. So that means that on their servers as well, probably keeping a history of that. And if everybody is going on there and searching for Hotel California, they'll probably get the idea, yeah, we should make that available. I'm pretty sure Hotel California is available. I'm just using that as
I would assume so,
as
yeah.
an example, as I'm sure you can. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah, but it's fun. And it's, the fact that it's transposed as well, it's good for all sorts of instruments to play along with. And, I just think that any instrumentalist could have fun learning to play along with stuff.
Sure.
Through that. You don't have to be a guitar player or a bass player or a keyboard player. You could be a saxophone player or a trumpet player or whatever, and download tunes and just enjoy them.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Yeah. That's awesome. I'm going to download this Mac version. That way I can, my micro Korg is plugged into my desktop setup right now, so I can turn on funky synths and play.
Yeah.
It's my...
Just download yourself Spirit of Radio and just drum along, man.
Oh yeah.
Or get Tom Sawyer or YYZ or something. I don't know if YYZ's on there, but
yeah, my guess would be something
pretty funky if it
something
was
like this. Yeah.
I think Spirit of Radio's on there. I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah. That's awesome.
No, it's nice. Yeah.
Super cool. I always learn. It's funny. I'm always expecting to not learn something new in this category, but I always do. I always learn about a new app in this category. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
There's just so much out there. That's awesome. Should we move to album?
Sure.
Cool. This is going to get weird. I'm going to just preface, since this is the next episode that is going to actually publish. We're recording on January 31st.
December 31st.
Oh my gosh. Yes, December. Thank you. Let me say that again for the cut. We're recording on December 31st, 2020. And I got really aggressive about finding people to record with, in the middle of last month. And the thing is I'm always expecting to plan ahead, but then actually a lot of people got back to me sooner than I was expecting. So I have over a month and a half worth of podcast content scheduled to record, or I've already recorded it. So I'm saying this is just a giant apology to listeners that the episode for next time, which is not going to publish until mid to late January, my album of the week is totally my Apple Music Christmas playlist. And it's going to be so late.
That's all right. There's always Christmas next year.
There's always Christmas next year. Well, it's funny because I've been putting together a blog post of my favorite music and apps. I sort of do a blog post at the end of the year, or the beginning of the next year. That's basically just a giant list of these segments of the show. What are all my favorite things? I've over the years started to include other kinds of TV, movies, consumer products, just things that I feel are on brand, but that fit into a favorites of the year. And I had to go to make this post. I had to go all the way back to like the end of 2019, and I was like, oh yeah, every year I definitely have this little holiday phase, and so I chose that as my so in late January, you all will be receiving a link to my Apple Music Christmas playlist, and I think that it's whatever. Since that's happening, I feel like I can rationalize a Christmas album for this pick as well, because this is closer to the actual holiday. It's also just one of these things that I feel like is just a real treat. It's just like a nugget of gold in there's just so much music. There's an insane amount of Christmas music, which I'm always surprised at what there is. I would be, if this were not an album that was like melodies associated with the holidays, I would be equally delighted to have found this album. The album is it's by Sam Palafian and Frank
Vignola. Frank Vignola, phenomenal player.
Yeah, I love the playing. And the album is, I guess their duo is called Travelin Light, so it's called Christmas with Travelin Light.
Yeah.
And they have a couple of other albums on streaming platforms if people want to search Travelin Light. So yeah, I mean, it's like tuba and guitar duets, and it has no right being as good as it is, but it's Sam Palafian, so it's
Sam was an amazing, amazing player, and I'm a tuba player as well as a guitar player.
Yes,
and Sam was God to us young tuba players growing up. He was an amazing, amazing man, and I got to do a masterclass with him back when I was at college, back in 1987. Sam Palafian came. And he was a guy that he turned me onto a different mouthpiece, right? He got me to try this Schilke 22, which, everybody in Britain, where I was from, we all played on Bach 24 AW mouthpieces. Mm-hmm. And he said, try this, but, and I searched for one in Manchester where I went to college. You couldn't get one in the shops. So I had to go down to London. I got on the train to go to London, and I went to Parker's, which was the big brass music store in London, and who should be sitting in Parker's playing tubas but Sam Palafian?
Really? Wow.
He says, "You're here to get that mouthpiece." I said, yeah, like this is the Twilight Zone. This is several weeks after the masterclass. I bump into him again. That's the last time I bought the mouthpiece. I got the train back to Manchester, and it changed my playing. I became, played that mouthpiece. Fast forward several years, I come to live in the United States. And I go to a concert. Ed Goldstein was my teacher at Towson. And he said, we're going to go to see a Sam Palafian concert. He's going to do Travelin Light is coming. Him and Frank Vignola. I said, that's awesome. So he said, you'll enjoy meeting Sam. I said, I've already met him. All right. Told him the little story. And he said, okay, that's very good. We went backstage after the concert. Sam Palafian sees Ed Goldstein, says, hi, Ed, walks straight past him up to me and says, hi, Richard, are you still playing on that Schilke 22 mouthpiece? Right? And Ed was completely floored because Sam had recognized me even though I was now in completely the wrong country. I was now in the United States. I was in Baltimore, actually Westminster, Maryland.
Wow.
Even the fact that for most people that would have been a disconnect. But he still recognized me. He still remembered what mouthpiece he told me. He remembered my name. And at that point, you realize that this guy is a absolutely beautiful, wonderful human being. And he was, because he cared more about what he did as a teacher and as a mentor and an educator than he really did about his playing. He was a superb player. And, Travelin Light was great, great duo. And that concert... It was really fabulous because they came out in the first half and they did their standard rep, the stuff that's on their albums. And then during the intermission, he sent out pieces of paper. And he got people to put pieces of paper in a hat with requests. And then they brought the hat up on stage and started picking random pieces of paper out. And they would have requests on it. And he and Frank would just play the tune. Whatever it was. Didn't matter what it was.
Yeah.
Classic jazzer. Knows the stuff. And the two of them just did it. They just, don't sit under the apple tree. Okay, what key? Oh, let's do F minor. All right, let's do it. Boom. And they did it. So
the playing on this record, which just, we listened to a lot of Christmas music this year because we've been, stuck at home. So there's just stuff going on the speakers all the time. And, all the best Christmas music is just good music that's just like melodies that we listen to around this time of year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this album is no different. Like the phrasing is just like so tasty. He obviously is steeped in so many different kinds of music. He could do anything. You're right. He's just like this larger than life figure musically. But then, yes, you hear these stories, these personal stories where someone who's met a lot of people can like put that, can remember that small interaction. And I think that's really powerful, because it's not all the time that you get both of those types of qualities in the same package, that extreme musicianship and that, that selflessness.
He touched a lot of lives. He was remarkable.
What Frank Vignola, since he's someone I'm less familiar with, what work should I listen to?
You will find him like duetting with Tommy Emmanuel and stuff like that.
Okay.
And absolutely keeping pace with Tommy Emmanuel. I would also reckon chat with Josh Rettenmeier.
Yeah.
Your friend and mine. He studied with Frank.
Huh.
And in fact, Frank signed, one of Josh's guitars. One of his favorite guitars has Frank's signature on him. And he would tell you a lot about Frank and what rabbit holes to go down. But he's a wonderful player.
What is his background? Like would you say, like, musically is he most known for?
Jazz.
Okay.
An astonishingly good jazz guitar player in the mold of a Charlie Christian.
Okay. So like more like small combo jazz?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
That's the feeling I get from the style of the record, but again, I have no context. And that's what's funny about hearing Sam play in that environment, is like he plays in any environment and sounds 100%. Like it's
yes.
So I don't have any context to draw from outside of that album for the guitar playing, but yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, and I chose this pick specifically because of the...
Yeah, I would put Frank Vignola up there with, like I said, the likes of Charlie Christian, Les Paul, those kind of players. Just extraordinarily good.
Okay, I mean, those are definitely, names that you would recognize if you have no knowledge of guitar. So those, that's high praise.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's incredible.
Cool. Well, it's a great Christmas album. It has no right being as good as it is for a bunch of Christmas tunes, because it's a pretty light album. Mm-hmm. I mean, the instrumentation is, you get two players, and we don't, the tuba is carrying a lot of melody. So we think of that as the tuba kind of leaving its role, but it works so well. But you also, of course, you think about it sort of like lightening the texture, since the tuba is playing and not in that lower, deeper register that you're thinking about. So it's like the album has this sort of like lightness too. Also, a lot of them are like these like super joyous kind of Christmas carols. So it's got a lightness to it. But then when you just hear how like polished and refined and expressive the phrasing is, it's just like, whoa.
It's extraordinary. Yep. So for me, I'm a great lover right now of collections. Things like the Rough Music Guides, things like the Putumayo collections, and the Smithsonian Folkways collections. I absolutely love those. And one that I would recommend that people look at is a Smithsonian collection of the classic Delta and Deep South blues. I really think that we need to examine the blues a lot more.
Yep.
In terms of our history. This music is the earliest American music, and it has roots in everything that comes out of there. We often study rock and roll or hip-hop or jazz. We don't take it back to the Delta. The Delta is where it starts. There's this myth in teaching American music, one which I was taught. American music begins with John Philip Sousa, or American music begins with Aaron Copland, or American music begins with Scott Joplin. But we have to go back to the Delta to really discover where American music belongs. I think we have had quite a year, of experience. And one of the things that has almost been forgotten because of the election and COVID and all of that, one of the things that was almost forgotten was the Black Lives Matter movement, and how incredibly important that is. And how what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd reignited a huge movement which we need to keep front and center. But I think if we want to examine Black Lives Matter, I think we also need to look at the experience that gave us the spark for our music. And it comes out of the experience of the South. It comes out of the experience of the Delta. From the Delta, it goes up the rivers to St. Louis, to Chicago, to New York. The rivers are the artery of America, long before the roads, long before the railway, long before, airplanes. It's that experience which then gets to the urban centers, St. Louis, Chicago, like I said, and which then spreads into clubs, and it spreads into concerts, and gradually we get to the point where people are experiencing, but by the time they get there, they're experiencing the likes of Artie Shaw. Mm-hmm. They're experiencing music which has developed from a root where it wasn't heard outside of the people that were familiar with it. And I think it's incredible. It is absolutely incredible to me that we have a lot of this music available to hear. That we can go back in time and hear Son House. That we can go back and we can hear Blind Lemon Jefferson. We can go back and we can hear Robert Johnson, even though he only recorded 29 sides and died at the age of 27. And we can see this historical document in our music. And what Alan Lomax did as regards writing this stuff down and finding it should be held in American education as highly as Vaughan Williams or Percy Grainger or Cecil Sharp, who wrote down the English folk music, and said, this is the folk music of our country, and this blues is absolutely crucial to our experience. And I would really love for, in 2020, for myself to really delve deeper into what I teach in terms of the blues. I do teach the blues. I don't teach the full experience, but I need to. I really think that we should be working towards a time where every child that goes through K-12 education has an opportunity to play the blues, to create their own blues, to look at the ethos behind it. Not just say, here's 3 chords, here's 12 bars, because we also have a style which is badly taught. A lot of people confuse a form and think that blues is about a form. It's not. We also, we have a happening, an artistic happening in the blues. And it is, like I said earlier, it is the spark. It is the kindling for everything else. You cannot understand hip-hop without going back to the blues. You cannot understand jazz without going back to the blues. And, rather than we have an approach in education where we think, well, what are the things we need to check off that the kids get to do? Like play, listen to Peter and the Wolf. Let's get that off the list, even though it's a great piece of music. Let's get the blues onto the list. And let's get the blues onto the list as a statement of what a kid can achieve and how they can link it. And so listening to these old recordings is so important to me because it takes me back to that experience. And I find these personal recordings that you get on this Smithsonian Folkways album are so connected to a piece of history, that the Folkways are trying to say, this is a piece of history, examine it for this purpose. That I find this particular collection just extraordinary. I can sit there and listen to one man and a guitar played through one microphone back in 1925 and be completely transfixed by the performance and trying to understand the depth of emotion that's there. And I think that the emotion there is something that is so real, because that's the only way of expressing the emotion, and emotive in a way that no other music was doing at the time. One might talk about opera being highly emotional, yes, but whose are the emotions? Certainly if you watch Madame Butterfly or another Puccini opera, you're going to, which is, contemporary, really, in terms of when written, you have high emotion. But what emotion are you displaying? You're displaying somebody else's emotion. What you have with hearing these blues recordings is the personal emotion that stands at a very fragile fragile point in history because of the history of slavery, the history of Jim Crow. You get artists here who are expressing themselves in ways which are dangerous. And yet, it has this massive, massive, massive influence on everything we do. And I think it has to be celebrated and discovered much more than we give it credit for. You know, I would love it if every single child in the United States heard the music of Muddy Waters, heard the music of John Lee Hooker, rather than say, well, you have to hear Sousa or you have to hear Scott Joplin. You know, they were the first people to write down music, I suppose. But these creators, these old blues men, and blues women as well, and let's not forget about people like Coco Taylor, women as well, and Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith and those sort of people that are there. It's American. It's right there. It's this country. You can go to these places and see. You can go to Mississippi and see where these people lived. You can experience it. And it's right there recorded for us. That blows my mind. It really does, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is in our way teaching blues is that you have to make it to really learn it.
Yes.
And that's not to say that you don't understand other kinds of musical art forms more deeply by playing, but I think, you know, the blues does, because it comes from personal experience, that whatever your own personal experience is, it's really hard. It comes back to that, what you said about hip hop earlier, being sort of autobiographical. Mm-hmm. You have to have some sort of your own emotional, even if that emotional connection is like purely related to some sort of abstract feeling you get when you improvise the notes. But yeah, no, totally. I'm with you. So
I also think we need to explain it and teach it not in vocabulary that we use for classical music. You know, so many people will say, okay, well, you use these chords, okay, you use this chord, it's really a dominant seventh, but we're using it in the blues. Wait a second, why the heck did you just use the term dominant seventh when we're not talking about any dominant tonic relationship here at all?
Right.
Why do people say, okay, in order to play the scale, all right, take a minor scale and leave out the second, right? Well, wait a second, why are we leaving out? We're starting from something which is anathema to that. We ought to teach this is the scale that you use for the blues, okay? Rather than say, in order to get a blues scale, take a different scale and alter it, right? Teach that scale to begin with. Teach the intonation of blues.
That's, I think, the real challenge right there, is because the scale and the intonation are not two separate constructs. Like what you do with the third in a blues scale is not really. It's not. You know, we write it on paper as the minor third because that's the closest we can wrap our head around it. But you know, it's like you play that note on a piano. You find lots of jazz improvisers kind of play with the ambiguity between the major and the minor third because they're trying to actually hit something that's in between them that a vocalist would sing. So,
and we have instruments which do that, and we certainly teach an intonation according to well-tempered European standards, and then we try to teach them to play the blues, and say, well, that third that I taught you before, well, now you have to make it out of tune. Well, you're not making it out of tune. You're actually doing a different intonation, and we end up kind of teaching sometimes a style of music with the wrong vocabulary. Right. Because we're trying to come at it with vocabulary that we've already given them, and if we always start with classical music, then we have to try to teach it in that terms, and we can't. And that ultimately becomes the problem of people thinking that the blues has a form or has some form of arbitrary structure because we're trying to explain it in European terms rather than thinking of it in blues terms.
I think it'll play to the strength of some of these popular music styles once we can get a mass of educators to start to talk about them differently, even though in the mass perception that different kind of dialogue seems like illegitimate because it's not Western. But I think once you can start to talk about it on its own terms, then it suddenly becomes more impactful and meaningful and almost its own set of rules and constructs.
To be an advocate, you have to be prepared to be outside of your comfort zone. You have to be prepared to make sacrifices. And if you want to be an advocate for all children's experience in music, you have to come out of the comfort zone of the way you were trained. And I think we owe it to our future to make that mental challenge, to reimagine music according to experience, rather than think, okay, this is the way I was taught at university, this was the way I was taught at conservatory, this is what I got in my Bachelor of Ed degree, my M.Ed degree. I think we have to rethink it and be very, very willing to be wrong and to say I've been wrong, and to really re-experience music and the way we teach it. But there's so many people that are, very stuck in saying, well, this is the way it was taught at college to me, so therefore that's the way I've got to teach it. And that to me is it's a shame. I want people to go outside of their comfort zone, to look at their kids and see, what do I have in front of me? Where do I connect with these kids? I have the experience in music. I have the knowledge, the years of experience, but I need to not just dip into my comfort, but out of my comfort to welcome these children into a world of music. And that might mean that, yes, during your 30 years as a band director, you don't get to do Lincolnshire Posey. I'm sorry. That is not, that sort of goal is not what it should be. Your goal should be to teach those children every single day. And to get them to experience music as an enrichment of themselves. Not to have some form of arbitrary goal, which, all right, playing Lincolnshire Posey is amazing. It's an extraordinary experience. But is that worth, the massive sacrifice of not engaging these kids at where they are? Is that worth the sacrifice of having the supermarket clerk in 20 years say, oh, I wish I'd kept on with the saxophone. We did Lincolnshire Posey in high school. Really enjoyed playing that. We had a good time. That was an amazing experience coming off stage after playing Lincolnshire Posey. But I wish I hadn't put my saxophone away, Yep. Yeah, and sometimes we confuse a once in a lifetime experience for an enriching experience for a lifetime.
Yeah.
Back in school, we had to always study Shakespeare. And we were told, when I questioned it, I said, why are we always reading Shakespeare? And they said, well, he's the greatest writer in the English language. And I said, yes, says the English. But I'm Irish. And I come from the country of Yeats and Joyce and O'Sing and Casey. And these authors are in our book. They're in later chapters. But we're just doing Shakespeare. Because somebody else's arbitrary...
Right.
Their thought of what the greatest English writer was somebody that wrote... It was an Englishman, right? And who were the ones that were always held up as the greats in literature? Chaucer, Dickens, Shakespeare. Who says? The English, right? Now look at the number of incredible writers there are in America, right? And yes, we are teaching them, but we're still also, not teaching as much. We should be teaching more of that.
Yeah, there should be so much more that we're, and I take in music, just sort of like contextualizing myself into this conversation. I take for granted, like I explored a lot of these popular music styles on my own, and you might argue that I engaged with them on their own terms because of that, like playing in rock bands, and in my middle and high school years, and that's how that music is made. But I am shocked to continuously hear from colleagues of mine, music teaching professionals who are in their, not even their first year of teaching, their 7th or 8th year of teaching, and they're suddenly now teaching a general music class, and they don't know how to play a G7 chord. And I'm like, what do you mean
Yeah.
you don't know how to play a G7 chord? Did you not learn that? And then it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess when I reflect on it, I did play a lot of my guitar in my room in high school. So like, but that there's room for that in the curriculum, you know, for both music teachers and the students that we teach.
Right. And there seems to be a thought that all music teaching has to go through 1770s Vienna.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what if we said instead, all music teaching must go through 1920s Mississippi?
Right.
What if we said that instead? What would happen to music teaching? Be very interesting.
Sure would.
Yeah. If we said instead of, in English class, all teaching must go through Shakespeare, what if we said, what about if all teaching has to go through Mark Twain?
Yep.
And we said, that's our yardstick.
Yeah,
Is
it's
Mark
interesting.
Twain, is Mark Twain the greatest writer in the American language? I don't know, but he certainly is a very important marker of the American feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And there are others.
Right.
And sometimes they're not getting taught. I mean, there are, of course, issues with Twain in terms of, there are issues, but there are race issues, quite frankly, but there are also race issues with Shakespeare,
Oh, yeah.
But we're much more willing to forgive Shakespeare for Othello than we are to forgive Mark Twain for Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer.
Yep.
So, and we're also much more willing to forgive Mozart,
Mm-hmm.
for the racism that's there in the magic flute and stuff.
Yep.
Or are we just creating excuses for not teaching Mark Twain? Are we creating excuses for not teaching early blues because some of the themes are urbane?
Right.
I don't know. It's a conversation you and I could have for hours and hours and hours.
We definitely could. I have bedtime looming, and it's not. It's not my bedtime.
You have a little one, I know.
Little tiny guy. Let me ask you this. So, since this is all sprung from our album of the week, I mean, you're speaking super broadly. Like, is there something that you would want if someone said, "I want to get to the root of the blues"? What is the first album that comes to your mind that I listen to?
"Rockin' My Blues Away" by Blind Boy Fuller.
Okay.
Go to Blind Boy Fuller. Now, he's an example of the Piedmont blues, so he's further out into the Carolinas. But you can hear a variety of really instrumental brilliance and wonderful emotion and a good variety of different styles. I think if you're going to look, a lot of times we, looking at the early blues, say Robert Johnson, but Robert Johnson's not the easiest person to listen to because his voice was almost on the edge of pain.
Mm-hmm.
And we hear that. And Robert Johnson's story itself is part of what adds to the ethos. But I would say Blind Boy Fuller, for somebody who you would just be tapping your toes to and somebody that you would want to sit down and listen to this guy play and you'd want to be engaged with everything he does. And I think he has more connection with the Piedmont style. The Piedmont style is related to ragtime. And I think somebody that has more experience in knowing jazz and understanding swing and those sort of things would see a very deep connection to Blind Boy Fuller. And then go beyond that, then go back to the Delta. Right. Going straight to the Delta can be difficult because, like I said, it can be full of pain.
Yep.
But somebody like Blind Boy Fuller, I think, would be where I would go on that.
Awesome. Before we totally wrap up the call, I want to talk about where people can find you and your work. Should we mention any of your books or the Prestissimo series? Any other places on the web?
The Prestissimo series is a series that I do with Oxford. I'm the series editor of those. A number of books which have to do with involving technology in modern music education. And I'm very lucky in that I get to choose some incredible authors to write books which I hope engage and inspire people to find new things in their teaching. You yourself, Robby, are of course a member of that distinguished cadre of authors. Thank you for writing a book in that series. And you'll find those on Oxford University Press. So you could just go to oup.com and look for Prestissimo. If you can't spell Prestissimo, perhaps you need to look at a different career. Anyway, so I don't need to spell that out for you. You know how to do that. And my own work, riverhillmusictech.com is where I keep my students' portfolios. If people want to see what people get up to. I'm not the sort of person that puts out my own stuff and blows my own trumpet. Part of what I want to do is always just to empower other people to teach and to inspire my students to love music. The most important thing to me is not my books or my achievements, it's the achievements of my own students. And when I see my own students go on to successful careers in the industry, then that's my most proud thing, and so, I will often brag not about myself, but I will brag about, a student that a few weeks ago, sent me an email with a picture of himself recording Stevie Nicks out in LA, and I'm like, that's incredible, You're recording my teenage crush. I've had another guy that recorded Ronnie Spector. I have a guy that now works for DreamWorks writing music. He is a composer for one of the top animation companies in the country. I have another student, a young lady who's out in LA, and she is in charge of licensing for Fleetwood Mac as part of what she does. These sort of experiences are what mean the most to me. So if you're interested in my students' work, go to riverhillmusictech.com. If you're interested in the way I like to inspire others to teach, then look at the Prestissimo series and see what you find there that might inspire you, and find ways that you can inspire your teaching. Because those authors, I always pick them because I know that they are teaching in the ways that excite me. And when I read those books and I read what is going on about the way you use digital organization, the way that Ron Kearns uses recording techniques, the way that Peter Perry organizes the whole ensemble, the whole ensemble idea in terms of what he uses in terms of technology. These are the people, all the authors in the series inspire me, and that's the reason they're chosen. And so I would recommend that series to anybody who's interested.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be a long one. I'm going to I will do quite a bit of editing, but I'm probably going to leave it fairly long because, it's like the opening, it's the 2021 special. And so that's what I'm calling it. I'm so glad.
New world.
A brave new world.
Brave new world.
Well, I knew you would have nuggets of wisdom that relate to getting to the core of why we do what we do. I knew you would have hopeful and optimistic takes on how to be better. I knew that you'd be the perfect person to have on for my 2021 special. We have to kick off the year where we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel with how the pandemic is influencing our way of life and our work. So
yeah, and I'm also going to make you a little uncomfortable in terms of challenging the traditional ways we've done things for so long. But I believe that is part of what we all need to do to get out of our comfort zones just a little bit. We know that what we do works, but how can we enhance it by getting our, egos dirty?
Right.
By getting in there and finding stuff which reflects who our students are, where they are, what time they live in.
Obviously, so it should be sooner than, because when did I do the mini series on my book? That was like 2016 or 17. So it should be sooner than 4 years before you come on the show again.
All right. I hope so. I certainly do. Well, it's a pleasure to spend time with you, Robby. It's always good to talk music with you.
Yes, I hope we do it again soon, and I hope that one of the near future times we do it again soon really is with a drink in our hands.
Okay.
In the same room.
All righty.
Great.
I'll see you later, bud.
Okay, yeah, so good to talk. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye. I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for this episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. You can also now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week in a newsletter. Please rate and review the show in the podcast app of your choice. It absolutely helps. And it'll only take a second and a few taps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about the show. Learn more about my music and teaching career at robbyburns.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud at Robby Burns. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.